G'day, my name's Alan Gamble and welcome to my top movies of 2025. Before we get into it, when it comes to lists on YouTube, I've always loved how Cinefix does theirs. Link to the channel in the description below if you're not familiar, but instead of my top movies just being a general top 10, 15 or 20, each number on the list represents a genre or category of film from 2025. It was an interesting year for movies, with some genres like thrillers, crime dramas or animation being absolutely stacked and spoiled for choice, while others like comedy, sci-fi and action not having a huge amount of amazing entries. Now, there are a few movies that will not be winning as they're yet to be released in Australia, like Blue Moon, An Enemy, It's Never Over Jeff Buckley, Arco, The Testament of Anne Lee, The Sound of Falling and Is This Thing On, among a few others. And remember, the point of an end-of-year list isn't to say my picks are better than yours or that your list is wrong. For me, the point of an end-of-year list is just to discover things you might not have seen yet, or in some cases, never even heard of. But without further ado, and if you want to skip any genres, they are all timestamped below, but let's get into our first category. Animation. 2025 for animated features had you covered no matter what you were into. We had big animation sequels with Zootopia 2 from Disney and The Bad Guys 2 continuing DreamWorks animations just hitting it out of the park with their visual style. But you can't talk about 2025 in animation without mentioning what a year for anime it was, with Demon Slayer Infinity Castle breaking anime records around the world, and then Chainsaw Man, the Reze arc, also performing really well. And then, while not on that level of box office success, we also had the lovely little anime, The Colors Within, which was a delightful coming-of-age tale. If we are talking about record-breaking though, you can't not mention the Donghua monster that was Nizar 2 from China, since it's probably going to end up as the highest-grossing movie of 2025 globally. We had some big new animations like Dogman, which we'll talk about more in another category, and Elio, which didn't land with quite the splash that Pixar might have wanted, but was still a fairly fun space adventure. There was a few that didn't quite land as well, like the latest iteration of Smurfs that I'm not sure anyone was asking for in 2025, and Night of Zoopocalypse, which might well have been good, but I'm not sure anyone actually saw. On the smaller side, we had a few gems like the currently unreleased in Australia Arco that's getting some solid awards buzz, and I will be seeing as soon as it finally releases in Australia. We also had a slate of direct-to-streaming releases like the lovely In Your Dreams, which was just dropped onto Netflix with seemingly zero fanfare, but you should 100% check out, and Predator Killer of Killers over on Hulu that proved Dan Trachtenberg knows what he's doing when it comes to the Predator franchise. On the opposite end of the scale, we had K-pop Demon Hunters that was an absolute streaming phenomenon that rode on the top of the streaming charts for months and months, but we will talk more about that one in another category. But for our runner-up, we're taking it all the way to South Korea with Han Ji-won's Lost in Starlight. Created by Climax Studios in conjunction with Netflix Animation, one of the areas of Netflix that actually seems to be making things worth watching, we have a great little animated sci-fi set in 2050 about an astronaut with her heart set on going to Mars to get closure on what happened to her mother. Her mother being one of the first Korean astronauts to go to Mars some 20 years earlier when disaster struck. Contrasting that with an earthbound budding romance with a musician while she's waiting for the call. Great little animation for the year. But for our winner, we're going all the way to France with Malaise Valadi's and Liang Cho-han's Little Amiel, or The Character of Rain. An absolutely gorgeous animation, and one that really brings a fresh, unique perspective on early childhood, telling us the story of Amiel, who is born in a vegetative state until a small earthquake wakes her from her slumber while her family is living in Japan, and while that might sound somber and heavy, it's told with a delightful and innocent tone that makes it incredibly heartwarming, touching on several more serious issues that a child might experience, like discrimination, moving, or even death, but through the eyes of such a creative lens of visual metaphors as Amiel learns about the world from her perspective. but a unique tale with such gorgeous animation is why Little Amiel, or the character of Rain, takes the best animation of 2025. Crime and mystery merged this year because there were fewer number of mysteries that released, but we still did get a handful to warrant including them. Like the full slate from Netflix with the Thursday Murder Club, letting some older retirees take a shot at solving a case or two, and the still great, and I will watch as many of them as they make, Knives Out returning with Wake Up Dead Man, which sees Benoit Blanc trying to unravel a murder in the midst of a crisis of faith, with our first appearance of Josh O'Connor. And we also had the very mixed follow-up from Edward Berger, who gave us Conclave and All Quiet on the Western Front with A Ballad of a Small Player. Crime, on the other hand, had its fair share, with its multitude of heist movies no matter what your preferred style, from the indie art house heist movie in Kelly Reichardt's The Mastermind, with our second appearance of Josh O'Connor in this same category, in what's more of a slow burn character study, or the more flashy and big budget heist we had Now You See Me returning for its third entry, with its usual flashy fun that's kinda dumb at the same time. Following on the sequel train, we also had Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, which, unlike the first one, which was more of a gritty crime thriller, its sequel was basically a big flashy heist action movie set in Europe. And finally we had Shane's Black's latest entry, Play Dirty, that while had some hints and moments of classic Shane Black fun, ultimately was lacking something to give it that spark. Outside of pure heist, we had a pair of Western-influenced crime movies of Americana with Sydney Sweeney and Paul Walter Hauser, and the latest from Ari Aster with Eddington, giving us a showdown between Joaquin Phoenix and Pedro Pascal with a 2020 set movie that takes us back to, well, 2020. And we can't forget that even Wes Anderson made an all-star appearance with The Fahican Scheme, giving us a white-collar crime in his usual Anderson style. And Ethan Coen returned with a detective noir, Honey Don't, that was a big improvement over his last offering, Drive-Away Dolls. But for our runner-up, we're giving it to the latest from Darren Aronofsky with Caught Stealing. So, Editor Alan from the future here. Quick update, a day after recording all this, Darren Aronofsky came out with his new AI Gen Slop TV show. So obviously that means he's full pro piracy, so if you do wish to watch any of his filmography, he has obviously ethically fully endorsed you pirating his movies. I still like the movie, but obviously I will not be watching any more of his stuff moving forward that he is producing with AI slop generators. But now back to the rest of the show. Starring Austin Butler, Zoe Kravitz, Matt Smith, and Regina King, Caught Stealing is set in 1990s New York about an ex-baseball player that unintentionally stumbles into a criminal underbelly after his neighbor asks him to watch his cat while he's out of town. No, the cat, basically being the star of the movie, is not why it's runner-up. It's a gritty crime thriller with some excellent performances, some great atmosphere and sound design, and most importantly, probably the most accessible Aronofsky for anyone not familiar, but also probably the first one I'll ever re-watch. But for our winner, we are going with the highly underappreciated She Rides Shotgun, from director Nick Rowland and starring Taron Egerton, Odessa Azion, and a major reason for it winning this category, Anna Sophia Hegger. She Rides Shotgun is a crime thriller about a recently released from prison father picking up his estranged daughter from school when his mother fails to collect her. What follows is easily one of the best young performances of the year, which was completely omitted from the Critics' Choice Awards, but it's a performance that isn't just good, it's a performance that has to and does carry the entire movie. In a movie like this, where it's effectively telling the story from the daughter's eyes as you discover what's going on, her conflicted feelings towards her father, and concern over the fate of her mother. If that performance doesn't work, the entire movie falls flat. But thankfully it does work, and that's why it's our top crime and mystery movie of 2025. Comedy. A bit of a rough year for the old comedy, but due to its more subjective nature, where some people would have loved titles like Adam Sandler's return in Happy Gilmore 2, and others preferring the more quiet comedy with heart like James Griffith's The Ballad of Wallace Island. We had a run of direct-to-streaming action comedies like The Pickup, with its action comedy and heist adventure, Deep Cover as an action comedy about failed stand-up comedians, and Heads of State, which went the political action comedy path. There was also a few streaming romantic comedies, like My Oxford Year with Sophia Carson and her first of 2 appearances on this list, and Summer of '69, with a bit more of that classic raunchy teen comedy with a bit of a different perspective. We had Keanu Reeves taking a swing back to his comedy roots with Good Fortune, alongside Aziz Ansari and Seth Rogen, and movies like Code 3, which was a damn right better than it had any right being, about emergency service workers. If utterly bizarre and over-the-top insanity is more your style of comedy, we had the return of The Toxic Avenger Unrated that had you covered as well. But for our runner-up, we are giving it to the legacy sequel that never should have worked, with The Naked Gun. Directed by Akiva Schaffer and starring Liam Neeson, Pamela Anderson, Paul Walter Hauser, and Danny Hudson. When you combine a comedy film with a legacy sequel, 9 times out of 10, you end up with a really shit movie. And somehow, The Naked Gun wasn't. Updating and refreshing the content within the movie, but maintaining the utter absurdity and stupidity of those classic comedies somehow landed. But there can only be one winner. And the movie that gave me the most laughs, to the point of tears, was the 2025 remake of War of the Worlds. Alright, I'm kidding about it winning the award for Best Comedy, as an unintentional comedy should not win, but I'm not kidding that it was the movie that had me in tears of laughter from how incredibly atrocious and stupid it was, especially if you work in the tech sector. No, our winner for Best Comedy goes to the DreamWorks animation picture, Dogman. Directed by Peter Hastings and starring the voice talents of Peter Hastings, Pete Davidson, and Lil Ray Howery, Dogman might come across as a typical family kids movie at first glance, but it's a tad bit more than it might appear. Dogman is about a police officer and his faithful dog caught in an explosion, and to save their lives, they are sewn together to create Dogman. The comedy style is akin to something like SpongeBob SquarePants, childlike and slapstick on one level, and then stupid and absurd on a more adult level. Like all things comedy, it won't work for everyone. But if it does, you will have a blast, and you may regret putting this one off if that comedy is your style. But that's why it's our best comedy of 2025. Horror. What a year for horror. It seems the last several years have been pretty good to horror, but for 2025 we had a full slate of big horror legacy sequels, like 28 Years Later, with Danny Boyle and Alex Garland returning to their roots, and Final Destination Bloodlines being an entertaining blast for those that loved that series. We had a follow-up of regular sequels like Ethan Hawke returning for Black Phone 2, and the return of some animatronic nightmares in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. On top of that, we had the very successful Conjuring Last Rites, supposedly closing out the Conjuring series, though we'll have to wait to see on that one. We had some reboots like I Know What You Did Last Summer that I'm not sure anyone was asking for, as well as the latest video game horror adaptation of Until Dawn that, like all things horror, some people were not fans of and others really enjoyed. We had quite a few couples horror movies where it was mostly 2 actors playing off each other. Together saw Dave Franco and Alison Brie in their twisted horror romance. Companions saw Jack Quaid and Sophie Thatcher having it out with a more sci-fi horror. And Locked gave us Bill Skarsgård and Anthony Hopkins playing cat and mouse with a thief versus car tale. There was also a few more unique horror entries in 2025. Good Boy giving us a haunted house from the perspective of the family dog, and Steven Soderbergh gave us a haunted house from the perspective of the ghost itself with Presence, as well as some solid international entries like Best Wishes to All from Japan, and The Ugly Stepsister from Norway with its twisted, closer to the original Cinderella fairy tale story with a bucket of body horror. We had some horrors that were stunning on visuals but maybe lacked a bit of the rest, like Ash from director Flying Lotus, as well as Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, which I've been told is by far the sexiest horror movie of 2025. We also had strong appearances from Australia with the Philippou brothers' latest horror, Bring Her Back, impressively following up 2023's Talk to Me, and the much smaller Within the Pines that proves small budget indie horrors are still alive and kicking as long as you can do a little digging. But for both our winner and runner-up, we're going to the horror movies that actually got mainstream awards attention for a genre that is almost always overlooked during the Prestige Awards season. Our runner-up is going to Zach Cregger's Weapons, starring Julia Garner, Josh Brolin, and the reason Weapons is picking up so much awards traction, Amy Madigan, even picking up a Best Supporting Actress nomination with the Academy Awards. Another horror director that stuck the landing following a previously well-regarded movie with Barbarian. Great work. But for our winner, it can't be anything other than Ryan Coogler's Sinners, starring Michael B. Jordan playing twin brothers, Hallie Seinfeld, Miles Catton as his first major acting role, Delroy Lindo, and Jack O'Connell. While admittedly light on horror, the amount of mainstream awards that are circling is kinda crazy for any type of genre film. Ryan Coogler is in discussion for directing, Michael B. Jordan, Wumi Masako, and Delroy Lindo for acting, Ludwig Göransson for the score and soundtrack, as well as the movie itself being in a lot of races. In fact, it set the record for the highest amount of nominations in Oscar history for a vampire movie. And that's why Sinners is our top horror movie of 2025. Well, Spike Lee's 2025 music movie really summed up the genre for the year, highest to lowest. A year with a few highs, but a lot more lows. We had the disappointing but still pretty good Wicked for Good, a weaker part in the original, but that does align with the musical itself as well, and the mixed bag that will one day find its audience like the original did with Spinal Tap 2, The End Continues. We had all manner of direct musician-based movies, from Becoming Led Zeppelin that approached the group as four individuals on their paths to unite, and It's Never Over Jeff Buckley, which took us on a dive into his journey before he passed in 1997. We also had the massive Taylor Swift, the official release party of a showgirl that was a hit for fans, but left anyone else not a super fan a bit out in the cold. Speaking of movies that leave people out in the cold, we also had the anime colourful stage The Movie A Miku Who Can't Sing, which is crammed with fan service and good times, but if you're not deep into it, you will have no clue with what's going on. We had some music related dramas like The History of Sound, seeing Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor. Yes, that's his third appearance in this list, giving us some gay romantic drama, and Wolfgang from Spain telling us of a young genius and his pursuit of mastering the piano. On the lighter side, we had the fun, colourful adventure, but maybe not great, Odessa, and we can't talk about music movies 2025 without mentioning Hurry Up Tomorrow, a movie that I sort of toss in with the same bucket as Megalopolis. So much hubris and ego into a nonsensical mess. But it has ideas, and I think it could be a great movie for an actor's commentary. But for our runner-up, we're throwing it back to the animated movies we talked about and giving it to The Colors Within. Directed by Naoko Yamada and voiced by Sayu Suzukawa, Akiri Takashi, and Taisei Kido, The Colors Within is a coming-of-age story about three kids coming up together through their discovery and love of music, something that is frowned upon by the Catholic school that two of them attend. Totsuko, who has the idea to start the band, also possesses the gift of seeing people's colours as an aura that she keeps secret. Heavily queer-coded, but with nothing ever implicitly stated due to the innocent coming-of-age nature of the movie, but ultimately leads to a final act that is small in scope, but huge in importance for the main characters and contains some great tracks. But ultimately, talking 2025 music movies, There could only ever be one movie that's taking the crown, and that's the streaming sensation that was K-pop Demon Hunters. Directed by Chris Appelhans and Maggie Kang, and coming out of Sony Pictures Animation, who continue to do incredible work, and voice talents of Arden Cho, Mei Hong, and Ji Young-joo. While it might not have won the Animated Award, even though its animation is itself gorgeous, few could argue against its power as a music movie. What could have easily been a well-trodden story is heightened and made to feel a lot more fresh by its fresh take and location, dropping it in smack bang in the middle of the Korean K-pop scene. Great visuals, good story with some fun characters and a phenomenal soundtrack is why K-pop Demon Hunters takes our top music movie of 2025. "2025 for romance felt a bit weaker than previous years, but it still gave us some solid titles, as we had the usual slate of direct-to-streaming romance movies, like The Wrong Paris, where Miranda Cosgrove thinks she's going to Paris, France, only to discover she's going to Paris, Texas, and The Life List, about Sophia Carson discovering her long-lost bucket list and deciding to act on it, and maybe finding love along the way. And also My Oxford Year, that once again saw Sophia Carson, this time heading over to the UK for an Oxford experience. We had a pair of time travel related movies, with Time Was a low-budget indie romance, and Sore, A Wife from the Future, a time-travelling romance out of Indonesia that was far better than I was expecting. Along with time travel, we had a few more sci-fi related romance movies like The Gorge, seeing Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy playing a couple that are separated by a strange gorge filled with monstrous creatures, and Lost in Starlight, which we saw in the animated category, but is about a budding relationship with a musician while she waits for her call to go to Mars. And finally, the utterly bizarre but definitely sci-fi Love Me, that tells of a love story between an ocean buoy and a satellite after humanity has died off. We had a bunch of smaller indie romances like Mile End Kicks, but we will talk about Barbie Ferreira in another category, or Oh Hi, that sees Molly Gordon managing a relationship crisis during their first romantic trip away together. There was also See You Soon, where Alexandra Swarens gave us a low-budget, gay indie version of Before Sunrise, but in the best way possible. On the other side, we had some much bigger romance movies like Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy, which if you're based in the US might think, wasn't that a direct-to-streaming movie? But if you're in the UK or Australia, you know how big this series is. And we also have our runner-up, the latest movie from Celine Song with Materialist, with a stacked cast of Dakota Johnson, Chris Evans, and one of 4 movies in 2025 for Pedro Pascal. While Celine Song's style might not be for everyone, as someone that loved past lives, I felt a lot of that similar energy and close, intimate dialogue scenes with great writing. But for our winner, we are going with one I really didn't expect to be anything special, but kind of was, with David Fran's afterlife romance of Eternity, setting up a love triangle between Elizabeth Olsen, her life partner Miles Teller, yes, that's his second appearance in the romance category, and her first love that was tragically cut short with Callum Turner. A uniquely fresh idea that sets the movie in the staging ground area before you decide where to lock in your afterlife destination and who you're going with. Quite funny, but with a lot of heart, some genuine characters that grow and change, and just a delightful movie is why it's our top romance of 2025. War. While not as varied as last year, war movies for 2025 still had a decent representation of all the different time periods, with the American Civil War with The War Between, to the 1960s Sino-Indian War with 120 Baldur, and continuing on into the modern era with the French 13 Days, 13 Nights, The Hell of Kabul, set in 2021 during the evacuation of Afghanistan, as well as a look into the PTSD and other psychological and social impacts of post-war with My Dead Friend Zoe. There was the more action-focused war movies like the awesome Sisu Road to Revenge, which we will get into in another category, or from Germany, The Tank, about a crew of a Tiger tank during World War II that, if we are being honest, is a little bit of a poor man's Fury, but nevertheless. Speaking of World War II, it had its full range of movies in 2025, from the slow courtroom drama of Nuremberg through to the darker and more painful looks of World War II with The World Will Tremble. And of course, we can't forget the war-turned monster movies, like the World War II shark movie of Beast of War, where a battle of survival versus Jaws, or the even more ridiculous What If the Vietnam War, but with dinosaurs, of Primitive War. And yes, that's exactly as crazy as that sounds. But for our runner-up, we're giving it to the winner of 2024's award with Alex Garland and Ray Mendoza's Warfare, written and directed by the same pair, and starring Defaro Wunatai, Will Poulter, Cosmo Jarvis, and Kit Connor, is a very minimalist story and more of a situational experience movie, with the always incredible sound design of Alex Garland creating an immersive, intense, and deafening movie. With the obvious unanswered questions of why they were there and who was the good guys and the bad guys, it didn't really matter because that wasn't the point of the movie. And with the years of hindsight on the war in Iraq, we kinda know. But if you didn't like the unanswered or unasked questions of Warfare, you will probably strongly disagree with what could be the most controversial winner of this list this year. But for our winner of Best War Movie of 2025, we are taking it from the modern era into the future era with Catherine Bigelow's A House of Dynamite. Starring Idris Elba, Rebecca Ferguson, Gabrielle Basso, and Jared Harris, among many others, tells a layered and looping, tense 18 minutes as an unknown nuclear missile is detected approaching the US, with each looping layer moving further up the chain of command to give the same story but from a different perspective, and providing additional information that alters the context of the things we saw in the prior loop. What felt like a realistic take on the modern disaster thriller that used to be focused on natural events like an asteroid or an earthquake or a volcano or tornado, splits off to the human-created disaster of nuclear war. Where some war movies are about the spectacle or horrors of war, A House of Dynamite lets the pure chaos of war on full display, with each link in the chain having more and more responsibilities weighing on them. A very unique movie that, while it will not be for everyone, because of its unique and layered approach, it is our top war movie of 2025. Sci-Fi. Poor sci-fi in 2025. There was a lot of middling or good sci-fi without much great sci-fi in 2025. We of course had the big chunk of the usual superhero fare with Marvel, with both Thunderbolts and the Fantastic Four First Steps, both of which were fine compared to recent MCU entries, but still nothing amazing. DC gave us the first big new James Gunn universe with Superman, a solid, fun blockbuster, and even the international market popped up with High Five, giving us a pretty fun wild ride out of Korea. We also had a bunch of big sci-fi blockbuster sequels that landed with mostly underwhelming box office results like Tron Ares, which only highlight was the 9 Inch Nails soundtrack, Jurassic World Rebirth that seemed to be utterly hit or miss for most people, and Avatar Fire and Ash, which still made a heap but less than the previous two movies, and is the first one to ever really overstay its welcome. We of course had some that missed the mark completely, like In the Lost Lands, that looked like Paul W.S. Anderson watched the entire filmography of Zack Snyder and then said, yeah, let's make that, and then added enough lens flares that would be overkill for even J.J. Abrams. And oh boy, The Electric State. That might be in the race for the worst adaptation of all time. We did have some smaller gems like 40 Acres, a small Canadian post-apocalypse set movie, and Happy End from Japan, which was set in a school in a near future as an authoritarian regime moves to take power, but from the perspective of the students. Sounds familiar. Lastly, we had a handful that I wanted to be great but didn't quite hit the heights that I was hoping for, like Bong Joon-ho's Mikey 17, and Edgar Wright's The Running Man with a fresh take on the Stephen King novel that wasn't quite as fresh as I wanted. But for our runner-up, we have to give it to Dan Trachtenberg's third kick of the Predator franchise with Predator Badlands. The first Predator movie that's actually about predators. This sci-fi adventure stars Ellie Fanning and Demetrius Schuster-Kolomatagi and follows a young predator from his exile from his clan to an unknown world full of strange and exotic creatures that he wants to kill, as predators normally do, to win honor. Gorgeous visuals and landscapes with some great action sequences, creative creatures and kills, and even an unexpected but appreciated tie-in with the Alien universe. But for our winner of the best sci-fi of 2025, we are going with the much smaller Pavlo Ostrikov's You Are the Universe, a micro-budget sci-fi out of Ukraine starring Vladimir Kravchuk, Alexia Depika, and Leonid Pobatko, both in Ukrainian and French languages. A small-scale, limited cast, single-location movie about a space trucker deciding what to do after he loses radio contact with Earth. Moments of light comedy that will make you laugh, tense moments that will have you gripping your seat, and emotional beats that might just make you cry, all wrapped up in a little sci-fi that's being slept on by far too many people. Small-scale bottle sci-fi movies often make their way into my end-of-year list. In 2023, we had The Artifice Girl. In 2021, we had Oxygen. And in 2019, we had Aniara. And for 2025, we have You Are the Universe and our winner for Best Sci-Fi of 2025. Sports movie are a smaller genre that kinda just keeps on ticking, year in and year out, and most of the time covering a full range of sports. In 2025, we had both ends of wrestling covered, with the historical biopic of Mildred Burke with Queen of the Ring, in what would end up being the more pro-wrestling side of things, and Unstoppable, also a historical biopic, but about the more real sports wrestling and Anthony Robles' quest to become champion. Women's boxing was also well represented, with both The Fire Inside telling us the story of Clarissa Shields as she rises through the ranks to become America's first woman to win an Olympic gold in boxing, and the reality of sponsorship of women's sports, and Christy that gave us Christy Martin's story to become the most successful and prominent female boxer in the United States. Football had a double feature, with The Senior giving us Mike Flint's story of returning to his football days at the age of 59, and the strength and struggles that come with it, and then the more fictional side of Him, which, while it had mixed reviews, there are not too many football cross horror movies if that unique subgenre is your jam. Lastly, we had a few other sports covered. Happy Gilmore 2 with its legacy sequel bringing golf back to the table, Karate Kid Legends with its part sequel, part legacy sequel Strangeness, with the new face of Ben Wang highlighting karate, and the Benny half of the Safdie brothers giving us the MMA biopic with The Rock in The Smashing Machine. But for our runner-up, we are going with the other half of the Safdie brothers, Josh, with Mighty Supreme, starring Timothy Chalamet, Gwyneth Paltrow, and the third appearance of Odessa Azion in this list, as she was also in Until Dawn, and the winner of the crime category with She Rides Shotgun. Mighty Supreme is about a high-ranking New York table tennis player in the 1950s trying to make his way to the top and survive all of his often self-inflicted crises. What I would class as uncut gems but with more likeable main characters that you're actually kind of rooting for, even as they make stupid decisions. But for our winner, we have to give it to what I consider the most theatrical movie of 2025, Joseph Kosinski's F1. Starring Brad Pitt, Damson Idris, Javier Bardem, and Kerry Condon, F1 gives us a classic and fairly simple story of an old retired driver returning to the fold and coaching a younger driver. Conflicts and challenges arise and get resolved, but what makes F1 special isn't so much the story, it's the sound, it's the visuals, it's the camera work, the stunts, the visual effects, and the cinematography. Everything dialed to 11. And when you put all that into a fairly basic story, it can still give you those cheer moments, but ultimately there are only a handful of movies that stood out as being theatrical experiences in 2025, and F1 was the best of them, and that's why it's our best sports movie of 2025. Disappointing year for action movies, since I don't consider most of the top action movies from Rotten Tomatoes or Letterboxd to be action movies first. Movies like Black Bag, One Battle After Another, or Sinners, no, when we look at action movies, we are looking at action first, the rest of the movies second. But the reason it was disappointing is we got a lot of direct-to-streaming movies, from the action comedies with Heads of State putting John Cena and Idris Elba on the run together as leaders of the US and the UK, to The Pickup, which lacked that same charisma, putting Eddie Murphy and Pete Davidson on the run together as armoured truck drivers that also turned into a heist movie at one point. Continuing the direct-to-streaming run was Back in Action, which wasn't great, but it was nice to see Cameron Diaz back on screen, and The Cleaner, which was a poor man's Die Hard if we're being generous. When it came to the big franchises and sequels, we had Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, in what might be its final entry in the series, probably not if we're being honest, or the much smaller and shorter Nobody 2 that managed to wrap itself up in 90 minutes. Mission Impossible, could you take some notes please? We had the continuation and spin-off of John Wick with Ballerina, which wasn't half as bad as I was expecting, but also didn't come close to the original John Wick. And The Old Guard 2 that was unfortunately as bad as I was expecting, but I was still disappointed after the first one was surprisingly good. Internationals made an appearance with The Old Woman with the Knife from Korea, about an aging assassin navigating her last few missions, and the absolutely crazy Bullet Train Explosion from Japan, about a train that can't slow down, and was actually a legacy sequel to the 1975 original. From Gareth Evans, who previously gave us The Raid from Indonesia, gave us a more Western action with Havoc, where he replaced fists with guns and might have had one of the highest body counts of the year. But for our runner-up, we are maintaining that level of crazy with James Madigan's Final Flight. With middling reviews, I put off this Josh Hartnett action movie until the point where I was doing my end-of-year catch-up, as I had completely forgotten about it. What might seem like a fairly forgettable story is, and that's fine, because sometimes with action movies, the barest semblance of a plot is all you need. This one is about a mercenary taking a last-minute job to protect a target on a plane, but they might not be as safe as they think. There is a scale of gritty realistic action right through to movies that have chainsaws. This one is firmly in the chainsaw group. But there was only really one contender for action movie of 2025 for me, and that's the sequel to the best action movie of 2023, Sisu: Road to Revenge from Finland, directed by Jalmari Helander and starring Jorma Tommilina, Stephen Lang and Richard Brake. Sisu 2 sets up the plot in Chapter 1 and then proceeds to be the most insane action movie of the year by orders of magnitude. If the first Sisu was What If John Wick but Old Man in World War II, Sisu 2 is What If John Wick but Old Man in World War II, but also Fury Road, and let's crank the crazy even higher. Guns, knives, tanks, trains, planes, it's all up to be stabbed, shot, crashed or exploded. And that's why Sisu 2 is easily our top action movie of 2025. Thriller. What a year for thrillers. Quite probably the genre that was the hardest to pick a winner and runner-up for. And while we had a few that were a mixed bag, like the star-studded but disappointing Eden, and the big MCU Captain America Brave New World that played out more like a political thriller than your typical Marvel movie, everything else was pretty solid. We had some fresh spy thrillers like David Mackenzie's Relay, which was a great low-key gem coming from the guy that directed Hell or High Water, delivered with great surveillance and counter-surveillance. And similarly, we had the amateur with the more inexperienced take on being a spy. Steven Soderbergh tossed his hat in the spy thriller ring with the stunningly tight little black bag, with a runtime of only 94 minutes, and used every single second of it to maximum effect. We had a few more traditional thrillers that might have come from the 90s and early 2000s, and I mean that in the best way, with movies like The Lost Bus, where if you like 90s disaster thrillers, you'll be right at home, or Last Breath, with a more survival thriller, with a very unique setting following a deep-sea pipeline repair crew when disaster strikes. Crime thrillers also had a decent showing, with the fun but polarising Eeny Meeny that I had fun with as a quirky heist movie, or the movie that's going to sweep most awards shows but not this one, Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another. Now don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed One Battle After Another. In fact, it's probably my favourite PTA movie that I've seen. But the fact it's not the runner-up should highlight how hard this category was to choose. No, for me, the best thrillers of 2025 was dominated by the international market, with our runner-up going to Park Chan-wook's latest masterpiece out of Korea with no other choice, telling us of a man who has it all until he, and along with his entire company, is fired when it's taken over by a Western giant corporation, and what desperate measures he will go to in the highly competitive job market for his very specific industry. Full of biting social commentary and dipped in a layer of black comedy, No Other Choice is a movie that is both a great crime thriller and a genuinely funny black comedy, and one that will of course leave you with a devastating final image of the ultimate price of success. And from Korea for our runner-up, we head over to Brazil for our winner of Best Thriller of 2025, with Kleber Mendoza Filho's incredible The Secret Agent. Oozing in 70s style and set in Brazil during their period of military dictatorship, The Secret Agent blends slow character study with a tight, tense political thriller in a way that fully highlights the level of corruption as well as the fight against intellectualism from a dictatorship when they are in control. Wagner Moura delivers a phenomenal lead performance, but we also need to mention Tania Maria does completely steal every scene she's in as the elderly Donna Sebastiano. And while the ending might seem jarring, as was a small trend in 2025, leaving it the way they did reflects the painful reality of having a history like Brazil. That was a similar theme of 2024's I'm Still Here, but ultimately, that's why it landed at the top thriller of 2025. Drama. The Oscar race runners, the prestige drama. Often a category we don't get a lot of in Australia until February-March of the following year, but we have still had a fairly solid year. We had some on the lighter side like Caramello from Brazil, giving us a feel-good tale of a promising chef that finds hope and humour after he befriends a stray dog. And Rental Family that takes us to Japan, where a failed actor takes on the role of various family members in order to change their lives and maybe his own along the way. Richard Linklater gave us two movies in 2025, both in the drama genre. First, with his movie about a movie, Nouvelle Vague, about the story of Breathless by a young Jean-Luc Godard, and then sticking in the entertainment industry with Blue Moon about Lorenz Hart and Richard Rodgers and the opening night of the stage production of Oklahoma. We had some smaller dramas like Eva Victor's Sorry Baby, who wrote, directed and starred in the movie, and is a great little movie that deals with some heavy subject matter, but in a light and really genuine way. And Late Shift from Sweden, giving us a brutal but normal day in a surgical ward for an understaffed nursing team. We had some big name dramas like The Life of Chuck, letting Tom Hiddleston dance away in a delightful but polarizing movie, and Anemone, seeing the return of Daniel Day-Lewis after a number of years away from acting, albeit to mixed reviews. There was also the big frontrunners for the award season, where even if the movies themselves are not in contention for the big awards, many of the performances are. This year we have the likes of Sentimental Value from Norway, with director Joachim Trier and actors Renate Renisiv and Stellan Skarsgård both in the awards discussion for some amazing performances, and then Hamlet with director Chloe Zhao and actor Jesse Buckley also in heavy discussion for again amazing performances. Counter to those big name titles, we also have great dramas that have gone completely under the radar, like Bob Trevino Likes It, which if I had 2 runner-up spots, it would be taking one, with Barbie Ferreira putting up an amazing performance in a movie about friendship and found family that is sometimes worth more than blood relations. And it was just an accident from Iran about a group of people stumbling across someone they suspected of being a jailer that tortured them many years ago. There was one movie that stuck with me the entire year since I saw it, and it almost came down to a coin flip between the winner and runner-up. But our runner-up is Clint Bentley's Train Dreams, starring Joel Edgerton, Felicity Jones, William H. Macy, and Kerry Condon, her second appearance on this list, all of which are phenomenal performances. Train Dream takes us on one man's single life journey with all the good times, bad times, and sweeping changes that come with a lifetime. It is a quiet story. It is a simple story, but it is one that isn't dire and depressing as you might expect from a prestige drama. It has sad low points and happy joyful points, busy points and calm and restful points. The full gamut of human life condensed into an impressively tight 102 minutes. Train Dream gives us one of William H. Macy's best performances. Another really impressive performance from Felicity Jones as a follow-up from last year's The Brutalist, and a career best performance from Joel Edgerton. But for our winner, we are heading to Spain with Oliver Lax's Serrat, starring Sergei Lopez, Bruno Nunez, Stefania Gata, and Joshua Herdison, is a story of a father and son that have travelled to the Moroccan desert in search of their missing daughter, who they believe is attending the rave circuit. Being unable to locate her, they are made aware of another rave further in the desert and decide to journey with a small group of ravers to their new destination. And that's all I'll say about the plot that you need to know. I suggest you go in blind for this one if you can. The journey that follows is hard and goes places, and slowly sets up expectations of what the movie might end up being. But the reason it's winning the best drama of 2025 is it doesn't take the easy way of meeting those expectations. In fact, it takes a number of turns that I wasn't expecting in the best way possible, as I always love a movie that subverts my expectations in a meaningful way. Combine that with some of the best use of sound design in 2025 and you have some of the reasons Serrat is our best drama of 2025. So, how did we go? Did we miss any gems that you loved from 2025? Anything you rated way higher than we did, or is there something we didn't even mention? Feel free to let me know in the comments, as I love adding movies that I've missed to my catch-up list. You can feel free to like the video or follow my personal profile or Letterboxd if you wish to see all the good and bad movies I watch for videos like these. But for now, that's it. Watch more movies. Bye!